Hey, my relatives. This is Mark Charles. It is Sunday, August 29th. It's the afternoon, and I'm sitting down finishing up my second cup of coffee. And I wanted to talk for a little bit today about what's been going on in Afghanistan. And so I've been putting a lot of thought into this over the past few days, and I wanted to say something publicly about it. So I thank you for joining me. Before I began, as I always do, please let me acknowledge the people whose land I'm on. So I moved from the Navajo Nation with my family several years ago. We now live in Washington, D.C., and these are the traditional lands of the Piscataway. And I want to honor the Piscataway as the host people of these lands where I'm living. I want to publicly say how humbled I am to be living on these lands. And I want to thank my Piscataway relatives for their stewardship of these lands. Last Thursday, August 26th, was the deadliest day in the Afghan war since 2011. 13 U.S. service members or U.S. Troops were killed, and over 90, possibly even more, Afghan people were killed in a suicide bombing near Kabul, the airport in Kabul in Afghanistan. And it was a devastating day of violence, and it was a tragic day. And I mourn with the people, with our nation, and I also mourn with the people of Afghanistan who experienced tremendous loss that day. In an effort to humbly honor the 13 service members who were killed that day, I actually want to read their names for you. I've practiced their names a few times. I hope I have their pronunciations right. But I want to just read the names of the 13 U.S. service members who were killed in that suicide bombing on August 26th. We had Marine Corps Lance Corporal David Espinoza. He was 20 years old, of Rio Bravo, Texas. We have Marine Corps Sergeant Nicole Gee. She was 23, of Sacramento, California. We have Marine Corps Staff Sergeant Darren Hoover, 31, of Salt Lake City. We have Army Staff Sergeant Ryan Canas, 23, of Carrollton, Tennessee. We have Marine Corps Corporal Hunter Lopez, 22, of Indio, California. Marine Corps Lance Corporal Riley McCullen, 20, of Jackson, Wyoming. Marine Corps Lance Corporal Dalen Morale, 20, of Rancho Cucamonga, California. Marine Corps Lance Corporal Kareem Nikui, 20, of Norco, California. Marine Corps Sergeant Yohani Rosario, 25, of Lawrence, Massachusetts. Marine Corps Corporal Humberto Sanchez, 20, of Logansport, Indiana. Marine Corps Lance Corporal Jared Schmitz, 20, of St. Charles, Missouri. Navy Hospitalman Maxton Savoyik, 22, of Berlin Heights, Ohio. And Marine Corps Corporal Dagan Page, 23, of Omaha, Nebraska. These 13 U.S. service members between the ages of 20 and 31 all lost their lives in Afghanistan as they were seeking to help both U.S. citizens as well as our Afghan partners evacuate. And I want to honor them. I want to thank them and their families for their service. And I want to honor them and mourn and just state how humbled I am and how saddened I am by the loss of life that we saw that day. I also want to just mourn and lament the loss of the 92, maybe more than that, Afghan people who were killed that day in Afghanistan. I want to share a few stories in here, just so in case you haven't read all of this. But there's a story in the New York Times. I'm going to put this in the comment section about the bombing that day, and I also want to share the stat where I got that this was the deadliest day in Afghanistan. I found it in an APNews article that listed some of the deadliest days. The prior most deadly day was in 2011, when I believe we lost 30 or 31 service members in that day. And then I also want to just share this article from NPR, which highlights and gives a profile of each of the service members who lost their lives that day. And I want to encourage everybody to look at that article, to review it, look it over, and just, it shows pictures of these 13 service members, and it gives a short profile of each of them. And it just helps bring this home, what a tragic loss of life this was. And so I'm glad that NPR put that story up there. This was as I said earlier, was a horrific event. And of course, President Biden and the US needed to respond. I'm sharing a short story in the comment section now about the drone strike that the US did following that attack. And just so you know, that's what we did. There was very shortly afterwards, within a day or so, we had a drone strike in Afghanistan where we targeted a member of ISIS-K who we thought had been involved in either the planning of that suicide bombing or of planning future our terrorist attacks. And so that attack happened in the way we frequently respond, which is with drone strikes. On the day of the attack, and so I want to make sure, actually, I'd like to end this part because I wanted to not get too critiquey yet, if that's a word. I wanted to have the start of this live stream to be where we talk about and remember and honor those who lost their lives, and to reassure the family members that we so deeply appreciate what their children and husbands, and are not just husbands, but what their children and their spouses and their partners did and gave for the service of this country. And we want to honor that and share in the loss and the suffering and the mourning that is going on across the country for that loss of life. So I'd like to just take a moment to have a moment of silence for the 13 service members who died, as well as for the dozens. The last count I saw was over 90 Afghan people, maybe even more now, who died in that suicide bombing. So I'd like to take just a short moment of silence to remember those people. Now I'd like to discuss President Biden's response to what happened in Afghanistan. As we know, President Obama's son was also a veteran and died a few years ago. And he has been very public about his grief, and as well as his pride in his son's military service, which he should be. And he used that in his speech to display incredible empathy for the families who lost service members. And I appreciated that. I appreciated the way that President Biden was very empathetic and sought to try to understand and respond to the tremendous pain that people in our nation are feeling after this attack. However, and I'm going to share his response. So I got these from the White House press room YouTube channel, as well as from their website. So here is the link to President Biden's YouTube video, his remarks regarding the terror attacks at the airport in Kabul in Afghanistan. And then I'm also going to share a transcript of his remarks in the comments as well. Again, as I said, he starts off by expressing great empathy and sorrow and understanding for the people who lost family members that day. And he expressed, I think, some very real emotion of both loss and mourning, as well as anger, which all are to be expected. And it was good to see some of that response from President Biden in response to this horrific terrorist attack. However, around 4 minutes into a speech, President Biden took on some very, what I would call, dangerous rhetoric in his speech. The first was around 4 minutes and 30 seconds. I'm going to actually share a bookmark to that part of the speech right now. And at that point, what he said was, to those who carried out this attack, as well as anyone who wishes America harm, know this: we will not forgive, we will not forget, we will hunt you down and make you pay. I will defend our interests and our people with every measure at my command. And of course, this was one of the most quoted lines from his speech. And that quote, for many obvious reasons, did not sit well with me. Especially his first reference there, where he said, we will not forgive, we will not forget, we will hunt you down. By stating publicly that we are not going to forgive and we are not going to forget, means that America, at least President Biden, is going to stay and try to keep Americans in a state of anger and bitterness regarding this event. By stating that we will not forgive and we will not forget, he is committing himself to staying in a place of bitterness, revenge seeking, and anger regarding this event. And that, according to a statement, that will not end. America will forever, he is stating, hold on to these feelings and seek to act out retribution. He then uses what I would call dehumanizing language. We will hunt you down and make you pay. Again, referring to hunting, most frequently that is used in reference to people hunting animals. It's a dehumanizing term. We will hunt you down and make you pay. And then he commits himself that I will defend our interests and our people with every measure at my command. Now, if you think back a few years ago, and let's go back to 2018, President Trump 9 times threatened military action, or at least referenced nuclear holocaust or nuclear responses from the US in regards to the military options he was pondering with different countries around the world. I'm going to share this article by Business Insider that referenced these 9 times in 2018 when President Trump or his top officials threatened to attack or nuke other countries. And if you remember, during that year, he was rightfully called out, right? There were the 2 most kind of blatant ones were when he, of course, on Twitter, this is back when he still had a Twitter account. And in response to North Korea, and him and the leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, were having a debate over the size of each other's nuclear button. And President Trump tweeted, will someone from the depleted and food-starved regime please inform Kim Jong-un that I, too, have a nuclear button, but it is a much bigger and more powerful one than his, and my button works. And then to the Iranian president, he tweeted, never ever threaten the United States again, or you will suffer consequences, the likes of which few throughout history have ever suffered before. Again, this is most likely in reference to the United States of America's nuclear arsenal. And in his anger, in his arrogance, in his lack of humanity, regard for humanity, President Trump threatened nuclear war against people who said things or did things against nations, who said things or did things against the U.S. militarily. And so when we have Joe Biden stating that I will defend our interests and our people with every measure at my command, we have to remember who's saying this, right? This isn't some leader of some small nation with a under-equipped military. This is the president of the United States with one of the most mighty militaries in the history of the world and an unbelievable nuclear arsenal at his command. And he is stating to the people who attacked us that he will use every measure to defend our interests and our people. This was absolutely a nuclear threat. The point I'm making here, as I've made numerous times about President Biden, is there is very little, if any, difference between him and Donald Trump. Very little. Yes, President Biden was more empathetic. Yes, he has a bit more emotional intelligence than Donald Trump has. But when pressed, when backed into a corner, when attacked, they both absolutely come out with threats, irresponsible threats and rhetoric regarding the use of the United States' vast and unbelievably destructive military power in response to people who attack us. But that's actually not the most troubling thing that President Biden said in his speech. About 3 minutes later, 3.5 minutes later, President Biden gave another memorable quote, and I'm going to share a bookmark to this for the YouTube channel in the comments as well. And he was talking now about the unity within the military establishment to do what was necessary in Afghanistan and to get the evacuate to complete the project, as well as to respond to this. And then he began talking about those serving in our military. And he said, those who have served through the ages have drawn inspiration from the book of Isaiah. This is a book of the Bible, the Old Testament, one of the prophets, when the Lord says, whom shall I send? Who shall go for us? And the American military has been answering for a long time, here I am, Lord, send me. Here I am, send me. This is incredibly dangerous rhetoric, right? In Isaiah, the people of Israel are not keeping their covenant with the God of Abraham. And in that passage, God is lamenting that there's no one to send to call the people of Israel back to account. And Isaiah, who previously said he wasn't worthy to be standing in this throne room and has been touched by coal picked up by one of the seraphims and has been cleansed. And he's hearing this lament of the Lord. And he responds by saying, here I am, Lord, send me. What Joe Biden is doing here is he is ordaining the United States military to, in the name of God, go out and do what militaries do. And this is so over the top, unbelievably destructive rhetoric, right? When he is, yes, we know that as we are fighting ISIS and other extremist groups around the world, that there is absolutely a thread, sometimes a very strong thread of religious justification in attacking the West and American interests. And when the President of the United States responds and says, I will meet your extremist religious rhetoric, your nationalist rhetoric, and I will tell you that our army has been ordained by the Lord, and we are answering the Lord's call when we sign up to serve, meaning we are now ordained and therefore even justified by God to do whatever. And again, just a few minutes earlier, President Biden said that he would use any measure at his command, that he is now claiming a divine right to be doing these things. Divine justification. Making the extremist rhetoric that we hear from ISIS is now being met by religious extremist rhetoric by the President of the United States. This is not only irresponsible, it is dangerous. Absolutely dangerous. Joe Biden, the United States of America is not God's chosen people. Turtle Island is not your promised land. You do not lead an army ordained by God. And if you look back over the history of our country, you will find numerous examples where our military has done horrific actions of ethnic cleansing and even genocide. So do not stand on the global stage and in your grief and in your anger claim a divine right to enact nuclear destruction on anyone who might dare oppose you. Yes, I know you're mad. Yes, I know you're angry, but you have to understand who you are and what power is in your possession, and you have to act responsibly, and that means not going down this dangerous religious rhetoric, extremism that we hear from ISIS. Your response is no different. This is absolutely destructive. And it's flat out heresy. I've been warning people about the heresy of Joe Biden for a long time. When he talks about America's original sin, which he says is enslavement of African people. Absolutely, enslavement was unjust. Absolutely, it was something that never should have happened. It was a moral wrong. But to define it in theological terms as a sin means now you're trying to hold people account, not to a common moral understanding, but to a theological definition of right and wrong, which comes from a specific faith tradition. And so by the President of the United States framing the United States moral failings as a sin means that he now has to compel people not just to behave in a certain way, but to accept a certain theological framework for why we need to behave that way. And if you understand American history, this is what caused our problems in the first place. This is why I wrote this book, Unsettling Truth, with my co-author, Sing-Chan Ra. And so Joe Biden was just completely out of line. Yes, I know he's in pain. Yes, I know he's angry. Yes, I know he's upset. But he has to understand who he is and who he is not. And he is one of the most powerful people in the world right now. He is not the God-ordained leader of a God-ordained military, fighting only on the side of good. That is not the narrative of the United States of America. White people are not God's chosen people. Turtle Island is not their promised land. The United States of America does not have a land covenant with the God of Abraham. This is why I say American exceptionalism is the coping mechanism of a nation in deep denial of its genocidal past as well as its current racist reality. Americans have to tell them, white Americans need to tell themselves that they are God's chosen people, that they do have a land covenant. Because if they don't, then they're merely just another ethnic cleansing, genocidal nation built on enslavement that's never been held accountable. And that thought's unthinkable. This is where this mythology of American exceptionalism, which is rooted in the lie of white supremacy, becomes so incredibly dangerous. And Joe Biden is jumping off of that cliff with that rhetoric. This is just as bad as Donald Trump, right? Clearing the protesters away so he could stand in front of the church holding his Bible. So I wanted to share these things. I wanted to talk about these things because if we're ever going to be responsible citizens of a global community, we have to lay down our myth of American exceptionalism. We have to begin behaving as responsible global citizens who understand the incredible power we've unjustly amassed. We have to acknowledge our desire to use it more often than we should. And we have to humbly respond when things like this happen. Because when we turn and respond out of our anger, out of our emotion, out of our pain, we end up not only saying things like Donald Trump and Joe Biden say, but then we end up doing things like our nation has been doing for the past 250 years. So these are my thoughts on what's going on in Afghanistan right now. I absolutely honor the over 100 people who died. I'm grateful for the 13 service members who gave their lives in service of this country to help evacuate our citizens and even our Afghan partners out of Afghanistan. I am deeply pained by their loss of life. But we also have to remember we cannot respond out of the same sort of dangerous rhetoric of religious extremism that we're being attacked by from ISIS and ISIS-K. And when we fall into that same line of thinking, which is exactly what Joe Biden is doing here, we have to catch ourselves. This is what's so dangerous, right? When our nation doesn't have a common memory, when we don't know what we've done and we don't acknowledge what we're standing on and we don't acknowledge the horrific things we've done throughout our entire history. We frame everything we've done as good and ordained and blessed by God, and our enemies as evil, not only morally, but religiously. And we make this into a holy war. That is absolutely dangerous. I hope this is helpful as you think through how we need to respond as citizens when our leaders are responding so irresponsibly. We need to make sure that as citizens, we respond in a much more correct way. We absolutely need to mourn. We absolutely need to acknowledge the pain and even the anger we feel of what happened. But then we have to remember what we have at our disposal. And then we have to respond humbly as responsible citizens of a global community. Thank you for taking some time to join me this afternoon, my relatives. I haven't been able to watch the sunrise today or yesterday because it's been cloudy here in DC. We're getting some rain, and I'm actually very grateful for that. We have several days of rain scheduled or forecast this next week. But this is one of the reasons I go out to watch the sunrise. And I remind myself that Creator's in control, and that part of my task every day is to walk in beauty with my relatives, my neighbors, with this world that we've been placed in. And this is part of why I'm doing these live streams, because I want to help shift your paradigm so that we can, as a nation, begin to respond better and more responsibly than we have responded in the past. So I can't have my relatives walk in beauty, and may we learn how to walk in beauty together. Hakone.